This is where an important step can either take place or be skipped depending on the company and the culture. Some companies will go out and create new RFPs for all of the new requirements and actually allow companies to bid and participate in being evaluated for these newly defined structures. Other companies will be able to bypass that step and say, we already know that vendor A and vendor B are performing well. They're preferred vendors. We have a good relationship with them. Let's merely expand the role that they have. Now, if your company is able to skip the RFP step at this point in time, you will likely reduce the process, the duration of this consolidation project by 4 to 6 months. It is a significant step. Sometimes people call it an accelerated approach. But the idea is that you're able to take those existing relationships, leverage them, and expand the roles and bypass that RFP process. Other companies, other industries simply can't do that, especially, for example, in most government organizations. That would be completely unacceptable to bypass that definition and RFP process for people to participate in. But either way, you need to define the services and actually choose the providers that are going to be involved in those things. Now, one of the key things that can come up here, and you see it there in the kind of the center in red, is handling objections. As we've seen in the offshore industry over the last 5 years, sometimes objection handling can become public. So what if one of your small providers decides to make a lot of noise and it is picked up by the press in the local community? What if some of the consolidation involves renegotiation of relationships and contracts with labor unions? So don't just assume that all of these steps are simple and trivial. Every one of these boxes depends on your company, your situation, and the unique elements that you need to deal with, and some of them can range from public relations and marketing issues to labor union negotiations and ultimately employee redeployments. So this needs to all be taken very seriously. But as we select these providers, we can go through those processes. The last two really come together. One is a transition period, and lastly, the long-term governance. The key point I'd like to hone in, at least at this point in time, is that once these relationships are consolidated, once the vendor community is standardized, if the executives inside the company, if the executives inside the IT organization do not enforce these new policies, within 1 to 2 years you will be right back where you were before, with an excessive number of vendors, an unmanageable number of providers, and an inability to govern and manage these properly. There needs to be a significant company policy put in place that allows these things to be enforced, that makes it the right thing to do for project managers and executives and division people to follow this new procedure. So it's important that this change be received and enforced up and across the organization. Otherwise, all of this benefit, all of this work will be for naught. Take a minute with you and walk through a specific case study where we deployed a methodology that was very similar to this. Of course, the methodology itself is adapted to every specific client. In this case, the executives had the vision and they had a mandate. They had become convinced that this was the right thing to do. And there was actually an executive mandate, if I can call it that, but basically instructions from in this case, the board of directors. And the company had over 200 different service providers, and it set the goal, it had the goal to consolidate that down to less than 20. And it was also given a 120-day window in which to put that plan into place. And so naturally there was a lot of stress and a lot of pressure by the organization to understand what this meant and how to do this and how to work through a lot of the nuances of this particular mandate and deliver the results that the executives were hoping for. So in this case, we were involved, and what we began to do is go through the methodology again that I've just laid out. Inventorying very quickly, in this case, the business requirements. And in this case, it was more of a validation. We used a survey tool that was electronic, so we would basically send out a survey to about, in this case, it was about 65 executives, and do a quick check. Are the services that you're getting meeting your needs? Is there something you're missing that you wish you had? Is there something that you're getting that you don't need? And it was a very quick approach, but it yielded the validation that the business was getting generally the things they were looking for, and it also allowed for a few tweaks and modifications to the services as we went through this change. The second piece was going through and inventorying the service providers. In this case, because of the time constraint, they did not issue any kind of an RFP. They did use this rapid or accelerated approach, which eliminated any kind of a new RFP. And the change in requirements were awarded to providers who were both already preferred and two who were realizing a high level of performance or high degree of quality against the service levels and the metrics and so forth that they were already working on. So in this case, they began to work through the solution, and essentially what happened is they met the target within the 120 days. They had selected the providers, transitioned the contracts, or redefined the contracts and transitioned the services, or begun the transition of the services. What they found is that they didn't quite get to under 20. They got to 23 service providers. But what was probably the most significant is that before the consolidation, when you would ask the executives or the people in charge what level of performance their vendors were realizing, their quote was about 65%. Now, these were people who worked with these contracts day in and day out, knew all the performance and the nuances, and were trying to manage these the very best they could. And they didn't have a precise statistic. After the consolidation, they were able to tell us that the vendors were meeting their SLAs and their project requirements at 81.5%. Now, what's remarkable in this situation isn't that the number was either 65 or 81, but that they could tell us with a precise and a decimal point what that number was, because they had consolidated it to the point that they actually had a manageable number of providers. They could keep track of what was going on. They knew who was supposed to do something. They knew when it was supposed to done, who was supposed to do it, and they knew whether it got done. And they found that this was a remarkable step forward for them in terms of reducing their risk, reducing their uncertainty, providing an early warning system for performance failures, as well as simply giving them the ability to negotiate more effectively and have a fewer number of partners that were delivering and executing on day-to-day service levels. Now, your organization may not have the executives who are convinced that procurement or vendor consolidation is the right way to go forward, and you may not have the same kind of corporate mandate that the client I was just describing had. And yet you may be saying, I hear what you're saying, I realize the merits, I know that there is something there, I just don't know where to start. I don't know how to get my organization moving.